Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2022 Milken Institute Asia Summit. We are delighted to have you join us. To kick off the opening session, please welcome Executive Director of Global Markets at the Milken Institute, Laura Deal Lacey.
Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 2022 Milken Institute Asia Summit. We'd like to thank the Singapore Tourism Board, STB, and the Singapore's Economic Development Board for working with us for 9 years in a row to make this event happen. We actually hosted this event even through the height of the pandemic. We did it in 2020 and 2021. And that's because we had the Singapore government holding our hand and really helping us. So we really appreciate the support of the government. But it's nice to now be back with a more ease measures. And our participants want to be able to network, and they want to be able to meet without masks. So this is great. For those of you who don't know us, the Milken Institute is a not-for-profit, nonpartisan think tank that focuses on 3 key issues: finance, health, and philanthropy. Through our programs and projects around the world, we're committed to improving access to capital, increasing access to health innovations, and optimizing the deployment of philanthropic dollars. The theme for this year's Asia Summit is The World Transformed. We aim to leverage the Milken Institute's neutral platform to generate conversations that promote solutions for a healthier, more inclusive, more sustainable future. This week, we're expecting 1,300 guests. The program will feature 185 speakers, 32 public sessions, and 21 private sessions. From previous years, we're actually increasing the number of private sessions and roundtables because we believe in this economic environment and with the geopolitical divide, it's really important to have off-the-record conversations. While we're known for this event, actually the Milken Institute has been here in Singapore for 9 years, and we do a lot more than this. We host roundtables throughout the year on issues like capital markets development, ESG, philanthropy. We also write economic research and analysis. We have a report that comes out every year on the best performing cities in China. We're doing a lot on food and agriculture, on the rise of private offices and family offices here in Singapore in particular, but in the region. We also have a lot of essays. We have a digital essay series, The Power of Ideas, which is a collection of thought-provoking essays about the future of Asia in a transformed world. You can see all of our research is on our website. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome the United States Ambassador to Singapore, Jonathan Kaplan. Ambassador Kaplan is a prominent executive entrepreneur and philanthropist. He has been a great and much needed addition to the American community in Singapore. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage. Thank you, Ambassador.
Good morning. Thank you, Laura, and the entire Milken team for inviting me to attend this important dialogue. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to my colleagues and friends, especially those who've traveled from around the world to be here this week. It finally feels like we're getting back to a pre-pandemic world. We have Formula One this weekend, and it's exciting once again to be able to spend time together face to face. I'm honored to be serving my country and feel fortunate to be doing so here in Singapore. This is a remarkable place. I hope each of you are able to find some time to really see this country. Get out and experience its local food, diverse culture, and natural beauty. It's all around us. It's truly a special place. The theme for this session is a world transformed. So relevant, so timely. A world transformed. Let me take this opportunity to look back at what the world has been able to achieve over the last several decades, while also looking forward to the future with all of our global possibilities. It has been nearly 8 decades since the close of World War II, when nations came together to establish a rules-based order that has been providing stability and peace for all of us. And I think it is extremely important that we never take for granted what we've been able to accomplish so far. The average life expectancy has gone from below 50 years to well over 70. Infant mortality rates have dropped dramatically all throughout the world. More than 1 billion people have been lifted out of extreme poverty, and the global economy has evolved and become more concentrated and more interconnected. Open markets and free trade have given way to historically unprecedented achievements. We design in one location, we assemble in another, and yet we sell in a third. Remarkable progress. Most recently, we saw our countries come together to fight the global pandemic, pooling collective knowledge and resources to develop, manufacture, and distribute life-saving vaccines and therapeutics to hundreds of millions of people around the globe, and with an almost unimaginable development cycle. However, after several generations, I wonder if many have forgotten what it took for us to get to a stable world order. Wars of immeasurable human cost, sacrifices from people and from governments, economic miracles, grit, and determination. For almost 80 years, the United States, together with our friends, allies, and our partners, have been the proud sponsors of a post-World War II international order. And I need to take a minute to talk about the US-Singapore relationship. Safeguarded by decades of close partnership across the defense and security spectrum, strengthened by robust trade and investment, and underpinned by our extensive people-to-people ties, the US-Singapore relationship is strong, and it's growing stronger. We have all watched famously Singapore transform itself from a third world to a first world country in barely a generation. Just extraordinary. However, this transformation, like those of other nations, has been continually challenged and at times profoundly threatened. So, what will a world transformed look like? The challenges are more difficult, and we have much more to lose. Russia's war of choice against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people has sought to redefine what sovereignty means, and European security is at risk. State-sponsored actors are spreading disinformation, and citizens are being nationalized against the forces of globalization. Our world order is quickly becoming uncertain. Now, more than ever, we need to safeguard what we have built by facing our challenges together and looking at the opportunities that define the 21st century. Now, more than ever, we need to protect the rule of law, national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and free and fair trade. Now, more than ever, we need to reject authoritarians who disregard the will of their nations, who blatantly ignore basic human rights, and who often engage in coercive and unfair trade practices. Now more than ever, we must redefine the global trade strategy and develop a sustainable Indo-Pacific economic framework to address the complex challenges of the region and capitalize on the tremendous opportunities that lie ahead. Now more than ever, we must fight disinformation, demand the truth, expect the facts. Peace will not be ubiquitous. It will not be cost-free. We will have to adapt our international system to minimize the cost to our world, to expand the gains that globalization has helped us to foster, and to ensure that we continue to serve the interests and aspirations of our next generation. To paraphrase President Biden, we're writing the new rules for the 21st century that are going to help all of our countries grow faster and fairer. And I'm personally confident that our partnership here in Singapore and across the entire Indo-Pacific will provide a solid foundation for a fair, peaceful, and prosperous world transformed. Thank you, and I hope you have a great conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the panel on Global Overview, The World Transformed, moderated by Bloomberg TV's anchor and chief international correspondent for Southeast Asia, Haslinda Amin.
Good morning. It's great to see familiar faces and new friends. As the ambassador suggested, it is a fractured world. We heard from the UN Secretary General just recently at the UNGA in New York that divides are getting deeper. Inequalities are getting wider. Challenges are spreading further. It is our duty to do something about it. But here we are, pretty much gridlocked because of great dysfunction in the world. And this is playing out in massive ways. We have the war in Ukraine, unprovoked. We have a slew of crises, climate, energy, food, poverty. And now we have a market meltdown, the king dollar sending Asian currencies, emerging market currencies reeling, making it really difficult for the developing world to pay their debt. We had the Pakistan Prime Minister telling us just recently that hell will break loose if there's no debt deal. So welcome to the new world. Senior Minister, we talk about the perfect storm, but you say it's the perfect long storm. Give us a sense of how bad it's looking to you.
Well, I think everything you just described, Haslinda, whether it's the war in Ukraine, it's the pandemic, which, by the way, isn't over, the floods in Pakistan, the droughts in East Africa, inflation today spiking up, currency turmoil. None of these things have come out of the blue. None of them have come out of the blue. These aren't black swan events. We've got to look at the slow-moving changes that have led to these flare-ups. Slow-moving changes in geopolitics, obviously in the climate, in the global water cycle, in the loss of biodiversity, slow-moving changes within societies. We've got to look at these slow-moving changes before they become tinderboxes and before they flare up. If we keep responding to crises when they happen, we're going to get more and more crises coming. So these are the fundamental challenges we face. How do we get back into equilibrium geopolitically? How do we get the climate, the global water cycle, and biodiversity back into equilibrium, which is the largest challenge we face? And how do we ensure that the developing world, which now is at real risk of not being emerging but submerging, is brought back into a mold of continued convergence? These are really big issues. And if we keep responding to crises, we'll find that just as we found that the response to the pandemic has led now to a very serious inflation problem, just as we find that the war in Ukraine is in fact accentuating that and sort of cascading around the world. It's not just Ukraine, it's a cascading effect around the world. We just keep having more crises. So we've got to get to the fundamentals. We have to sort out today's crises well first. And as you've highlighted, it's no longer a set of crises that are going to leave financial stability intact. We now face a real prospect of financial instability, not just in the developing world, where a wave of debt distress is very likely, but in the advanced countries.
RJ, how are you looking at it? Bring some perspective to us.
So my perspective on the topic that the senior minister just said is, if you play cricket, you cannot win a match by playing on the back foot all the time. You have to go towards where the issue is and be a little thoughtful about reading how the ball is flowing and start playing forward. And I think what he's trying to encourage us to think about is to get ahead of it and understand the trends and not always be responsive, but be trend-setting to them. And I think there's merit in that in the private world, in the business world. This is not a public sector issue. It's not a societal loan issue. It's for all of us to get this working together. You know, my general opinion about the emerging markets remains very constructively optimistic. I am nervous about the coming year and two because I feel you need to fasten your seatbelts for this next couple of years. But I believe that when you come out of that, what's going on in the emerging markets with this inexorable demographic benefits and the growth of the middle class is still something that will transform the way business is conducted over the next decade or two. Don't know which number you believe, but if we all have an emerging middle class here, which consumes 40 trillion and will become 50, 60 trillion, whether it's 50 or it's 60, it's a heck of a lot of money. And it's a lot of opportunities in goods and services, and they demand better education, better healthcare, better financial access, and a cleaner world to live in. Those are all things where governments, and Singapore is a prime example, governments can create a sandbox. Governments can reduce some of the risk for private capital. Governments can help enable some of the cost at the beginning, but scaling comes from private capital. And I think private capital, private ingenuity, and what companies can do needs to be brought to the party now on all those aspects of education, financial services, healthcare, and green. I think that's the first part. The second part is that digitization, and whichever way you describe it, whether it's X billion connected devices today and Y billion tomorrow, or so many people accessing the internet with so many smartphones, the numbers are not important. The point is it's ubiquitous. And I think the Internet of Things and 5G and 6G tomorrow and what's going on with infrastructure and cloud computing and next edge and AI and machine learning and quantum and all the stuff we throw at each other, the composite of all that is a transformational opportunity on access and affordability. Basically, incumbency advantages are being shattered by digitization. And therefore, access and affordability is being transformed for this middle class by this technology. So when you combine this middle class with this technology revolution that is driving a change in access and affordability, and then you add finally the fact that remote working capabilities and technology means that I as an entrepreneur no longer have to be confined to where I am, but I can access talent pools from anywhere. And global capital is now globalizing and isn't only a US and European thing. That to me is the confluence of things that create some optimism for me as a private sector individual. As a responsible citizen, I share everything that he just said because it makes me very nervous.
So there are opportunities, there are ways to overcome the challenges. Let's break down some of those challenges. Inflation, front and center, 40-year high in the US and is being experienced globally. You say, SM, that inflation is here to stay. The era of low rates, low inflation is over.
Well, I think there are no good options anymore. Once you have a situation like this where inflation is already above tolerable limits, there are no solutions that do not involve a fairly sharp trade-off for economic growth. We're going to see it in the United States, we're going to see it in Europe, it's going to happen in the United Kingdom, and it's going to happen in a large part of the developing world. A real problem we face now is that there's a very broad range of countries, particularly in the developing world, but also some advanced countries, that are now going to be whipsawed big time by the combination of recession in the advanced countries, slow growth globally, higher interest rates almost everywhere, and a stronger dollar. And that, for a whole range of countries, is a very bad combination. Countries that are borrowed in US dollars, countries that depend on imports that are denominated in US dollars, that itself is a problem. Together with higher interest rates, which jack up the costs of debt servicing. Together with slow growth, the revenues aren't there. So what we didn't see in the last 2 years, because governments flooded the market with liquidity, central banks flooded the market with liquidity, now we are seeing real problems, partly as a consequence of that response of the last 2 years, and there are no good options anymore now. You've got to basically, you can't keep pumping in liquidity, you've got to go through some economic pain, and you've got to make sure you do it in a way that doesn't hurt the poor and the middle class too much, particularly the poor. So it's a real challenge.
And it's a fine balance. I'm just wondering whether you get a sense that we're close to a tipping point, that something would break. And if something breaks, what would that be?
Well, US junk bond yields are now almost 9%. Investment-grade corporate bonds, triple B, just barely investment grade, are now about 6%, which is the highest in something like 13 years or so. The tide is going out, and we'll see who's been standing naked. And there are going to be a lot of casualties. In the developing world, this whipsaw of a much stronger dollar, higher interest rates, and slower growth is going to leave many more in distress. Ajay's optimism is very well placed in this part of the world. I'd say India and a good part of Southeast Asia are where the optimism is still there.
Right.
There are going to be casualties. There are going to be casualties. Corporates which have overborrowed. Fortunately, governments in a much better position than they used to be, but there's going to be some constraint. So once you reach this situation, you find that governments no longer have the ability to keep pumping out support. Central banks, which probably overdid their efforts to ensure enough liquidity in the system, and overdid the taking of risk out of the system, are now in the situation of having to do the reverse. So there are no good options. The optimism has to come from the supply side. Get the engines of growth going again. Fire entrepreneurial energies. And make the most out of the fact that within Asia, two large population bases, India and Southeast Asia, are now on the up. They're now moving up. Make the most of that. Keep them open. Have the rest of the world involved. Don't make this just an Asian play. This is a new part of Asia that's emerging, and it's a positive force for the world.
How do you see the corporates responding? High inflation, higher cost?
Well, I think there's one other thing to add to that cycle of interest rates and dollar-denominated debt, and that is quantitative tightening. Just as we did not understand what quantitative easing would do to our markets and our ability, I don't think all of us have fully factored in or comprehended the impact of real quantitative tightening, which is only just beginning in real forms in the Western world. So I think there's that little negative in the space as well to keep an eye on. But in general, Haslinda, if you look at a company like ours, General Atlantic, we've asked all our portfolio companies over the last few years, make sure that your business plans are fully funded, make sure that you're net cash flow positive, make sure that you're not in the need for money over the next couple of years because you need to fasten your seatbelts. And the strong will get stronger in that cycle. So the idea now is to double down on those who can consolidate and get the scale and the capability to do this kind of effort of growth that I think is possible coming out of this a couple of years into it. I just think the next couple of years need to be managed very carefully and very tightly without the wrong kind of optimism, but also with an eye on the future that in this period, those who invest could come out at the other end in a much better place. In the industry I'm in, for the first time, I'm beginning to see more rational deals being discussed, more emphasis on true due diligence, a better pricing and financial structuring environment. It is beginning to come. Public markets have corrected much faster and much deeper than the private markets have yet because of the amount of liquidity floating in there. When QT really starts, I think there may be a correction in both, which may give an opportunity for experienced, deep-pocketed investors to come out the other end in a better place.
I want to touch on the other big issue, geopolitics, rising US-China tensions, and now over Taiwan. Senior Minister, your thoughts on how this might play out?
Well, it's not playing out very well. And
is it about to get worse?
And the question is how we bring it back in the direction of equilibrium. I think it's going to take some time. And it means moving away from a focus on tactics, which, if all you have are tactics, they eventually become read as strategy. Move away from that and move to strategy. And understanding on both sides of what's in their fundamental interests, what is in their common interests, and let that define the relationship. there has to be a slowdown on tactics.
How will it work out when both sides are not even talking to each other right now?
I think, well, I'm not entirely unhopeful. In fact, until recently, there were many conversations taking place. And I think conversations will resume. I think both sides are deeply aware of the risks to themselves and to the larger global order. If you simply have things building up to a crescendo and you get some serious flare-ups.
Is there a need for the US to allow China to play a bigger role in a multilateral?
Well, I've said this before. I've said this recently as well. I believe so. I believe that makes for a better equilibrium. China has to be accommodated. There have to be rules of the game to ensure fair competition. There have to be provisions within countries to ensure that national security is not compromised. That's all fair game. But China has to be accommodated in the global multilateral order and given its responsible role.
Given all these challenges, Ajay, your thoughts on how innovation can drive progress? How do we overcome all these challenges from a business perspective?
Well, like I said, those spaces of education, health, financial services, and climate are all places where innovation can be applied. But I mean, Hiro is sitting in the audience, so he knows more about climate than I do. But if you were to ask him, he would tell you that somewhere between 75 and 80% of the technologies that we need to make progress, to meet the goals we would like to meet over the next 2 decades are available today. So it's not about developing new technologies. It's actually about sifting through them and finding a way to commercialize them and get the right scale to them. And also making sure that what we thought were cool technologies are actually real solutions. We were discussing a few minutes ago, some of the technologies that we saw actually have downstream impacts further down that aren't great for the environment. We've got to get transparency of that, transparency of supply chains, transparency of level 3 exposures, and start really getting to scale on these solutions. That, to me, is the innovation we need. It's not just new technology, which we spoke about just now when I was talking about quantum computing and AI and natural language. All this is happening. I think it's actually getting them to scale in the right way. That is now our next task as corporates and as investors.
So I think Ajay is absolutely right. A significant proportion of the technologies required to achieve 2030 targets are already there, but we don't yet have scale. A significant proportion of the technologies to really get to net zero by 2050 at the latest are still at demonstration stage at best.
Pilots, yeah.
Both these challenges, getting to 2030 with enough scale and taking further the real breakthrough technologies required to get to net zero, require both the private sector and the public sector. The public sector has to be part of the game. First, by having pricing policies on carbon especially, but a whole set of pricing and subsidy policies. Second, through financial regulation. How you regulate banks and capital markets is going to be critical. Thirdly, you need co-investment by the public sector. You've got to de-risk these investments, whether it's having large-scale demonstration projects, investing in large-scale grids and infrastructure. It requires public sector investment. So this is the largest public-private endeavor that we've ever had to contemplate, and we now have to take it seriously and find ways of implementing this, not just national scale, but globally. It is the largest public-private challenge that we face, but we have to face it. This is the race for our life.
And that's the idea. De-risk, lower the prices, get government investing in infrastructure so that the private sector can go on top. But that's our task now, not just on new technology, but get this to scale. We really have to.
Final words before we wrap up this first part. I mean, Ajay, you express optimism right from the very beginning. What's the biggest risk you see out there?
This separation of what used to be taken for granted of globalization, the way it's currently playing out, to me, for companies is very challenging. And I think it could Obviously, the immediate economic challenges are very real, but longer term, my concern is what I call nationalistic chauvinism can overtake the ability to bring these global technologies to work in a local way, in the best possible way. You cannot reinvent these in every country. That would be an awful place to be.
Senior Minister, you outlined the challenges. What gives you the best hope?
Well, first, that there is innovation taking place among scientists, amongst companies, and the public sector does have it within itself to get involved. Second, collaboration is still possible. What Ajay just spoke about is the state of affairs today, a trend towards inward-looking. I mean, basically, you have an inward-looking tendency in a whole set of areas. But collaboration is possible. It is possible to strengthen multilateralism, even if it's imperfect. It's possible to get clusters of countries coming together. Collaboration is possible. We have to innovate and collaborate our way out of this perfect long storm. And it can be done.
Senior Minister Ajay, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Good having you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.